Welcome to Living Chronic, the podcast that explores the realities of living with chronic illness and disability while redefining how we thrive in our personal and professional lives. I'm your host, Brandy Schantz, a disabled veteran and chronic illness warrior, here to discuss the challenges, triumphs, and untapped potential of life with a chronic condition. Before we dive in, please take a minute to hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening. Now, let's change the way we think about disability together. Hi, this is Brandy Schantz, and you're listening to Living Chronic. Today, I'm here with Matt Reed. He is also on his local board of the Crohn's Colitis Foundation, just like me. Also, a dog dad to three dogs, so we already have a lot in common. He's also the chief revenue officer for a startup called Paralytics, and he's a family guy, two daughters, really living life, doing his best as a Crohn's patient. So, welcome, Matt.
Hey, Brandy, thanks for having me. Excited to talk to you today.
I'm so happy that we got to know each other. We met while in a joint meeting for the Take Steps Committee. We're now collaborating with the Crohn's Colitis Foundation across the region, which has been a lot of fun. I really love getting to know my fellow Crohn's patients and folks giving back by serving on the board. So, super happy to have you here. Tell me a little bit about your story.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So, from a Crohn's and colitis perspective, I was diagnosed with UC in my mid 20s, and certainly was a journey. Being diagnosed and learning what that all means for me as a patient, and it was something I kind of dealt with. And it's in an interesting time. I was traveling a lot. I was working in New York at the time, and so for me, it was just kind of trying to figure out how to navigate the challenges that came with that, and also kind of living my normal life. As a father, as a employee, and as a spouse to as well. So all those things kind of came fast and furious, and I didn't understand a lot of it when I first was diagnosed. But certainly has been a learning. Now that I'm 42, and I've had it for about 17 years now. So it's certainly been a journey for sure.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about how much you have to change and adjust as you become ill. And we have a lot of similar stories, and I think this is true for so many people, not just Crohn's and colitis patients, but people with various chronic illnesses. You think you're one person or you are one person and you're out there, you're doing all the traveling, you're putting in the 80 plus hour weeks ready to really storm the corporate America and climb that ladder. And then you find out that you have some limitations due to your illness. So how did you navigate those kinds of challenges working in New York, doing the traveling, trying to figure out how can I be the person that I want to be in my career and a colitis patient?
Yeah, it's a mental and physical challenge, right? I think anyone, whether you're dealing with Crohn's or UC, or some other illness and disease. I think one, just coming to the realization that things will be different, and accepting that. That was a challenge for me. I tend to um, it's frustrating when things that you normally do and can do and have done are now somewhat challenges. And so, that certainly provided me with some, mental and physical frustrations, just, not having the ability to do some of the things that I wanted to do, or just made things a little more complicated. And so, yeah, I mean, for the first, you know, part of my UC journey, I mean, it was under control in some regard, with little biological medicine required, but that soon changed, kind of halfway through my journey. And honestly, that's where I got connected with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, and the fact that I was struggling and in a pretty bad spot physically, and I needed something to change, and I needed an outlet to help me do that. And so, yeah, that was a difficult part to kind of navigate, and you have to be your own advocate in these
Mhm.
situations, and you can't take oh, well, this is what you're going to deal with as an answer, and things will be this way for the foreseeable future. And so, with throughout some connections I made on the foundation, I was able to have access to some medical uh, expertise that allowed me to, get to where I am today, which is in remission. But certainly, there were some major challenges, along the way.
Yeah, I think that's what they don't start out telling you. I remember when I was first diagnosed and I had started out with some pretty bad symptoms. And then I got to the point where I asked my doctor, "Hey, what am I supposed to do? I can't get into work." And they really didn't have an answer, nor did anybody know how to prepare me for the fact that there's no known, you know, exact drug regimen that they could put you on that's going to get you right into remission. This isn't like cancer where you're going to do XYZ and then in 6 months you ring the bell and on with your life. You could be in bed and suffering for years before they find a way to get you into remission. And, I always wish that somebody could prepare us a bit better for that reality that this is going to be difficult and we don't know how to get you in remission. We have to try different things,
Right.
and that's a struggle, of course.
Yeah, and
Uh,
specifically in your, to the kind of the focus of the podcast and what you're doing, with organizations and helping them kind of support folks who are living with a chronic illness. It's a very difficult challenge to navigate, and probably not too dissimilar with other diseases, but a lot of people don't understand UC and Crohn's.
mhm,
It's not easily something you want to talk about all the time, right? And so that was a big challenge for me is, one, explaining it, and two, giving myself the platform to do so, and what that meant. And, a lot of times it's not an illness you can see. And so, it is difficult to kind of delineate between, you look okay, and
mhm,
you feel terrible, right? And those things were hard to navigate, and people wouldn't even have known if I didn't say anything, because I hid it as much as I could.
yeah,
um, I don't know why I did that. Maybe because I felt um, ashamed of it. I don't know what the reason was, but it certainly was a challenge for me to kind of let people into that, and certainly my family knew. But
mhm,
from an employer perspective, my friend network, even when they did know, if they did know, they also didn't understand. Like, oh, I've had colitis or whatever, and I'm like, well, it's a little bit different. So yeah, certainly there were some challenges kind of navigating, you know, what I was going through, and then also the employer employee relationship, and
mhm,
the toll that took on me from my day in day out job, traveling and working. And so for the most part I kind of just kept that to myself. um, in the fact that it was hard to say, well, I can't do this because I'm in the bathroom 20 times a day or something, right? And so
mhm,
those are not easy conversations to have, and it's certainly been a challenge. It was a challenge. I'm less so now, but those things when you're kind of in your career, and you're trying to build something, you don't want that to be a hindrance on you in doing what you are there to do. So that was definitely a challenge for me, and probably still will be if I get to a point where I'm in a state of a bad flare again. Um, that is something I'm going to have to continue to deal with, and I'm sure you know that all too well.
yeah, absolutely. Again, so many of us, our stories are the same. We just don't share them because I was just like you. I did not want to tell everybody just how sick I was. I wanted to pretend like everything was fine. Who wants to
Yeah,
get out there and tell people that, well, you never see me before noon because I'm in the bathroom for 6, 7 hours every morning.
yeah,
It's not an easy subject to talk about. And then, of course, people, again, when you look fine, people think, oh, must be fine. Maybe they're just trying to get out of work, or maybe they're lazy, or maybe they're going through something mental. And it's really difficult to explain to people who've never experienced chronic illness exactly how our lives go. And of course, in the workforce, especially for those of us who chose really brutal fields, to be honest, they're not there for your sympathy, empathy. They don't want to hear that you can't get to work in the morning, or you can't take this work trip because of how often you're in the bathroom. Or I remember at one point I was so severely nutrient deficient that I just kept falling asleep. Just
Yeah.
I'd be sitting up and just fall asleep, and I couldn't stop it. There was nothing I could do. And how do you explain that to somebody? So I think there's so many of us that just keep it quiet, trying to keep our lives going, when in fact, sometimes keeping quiet actually stops your life. You need the help.
Yeah.
But of course, companies are not equipped. They just don't understand, how do you deal with an employee who is now chronically ill? What do you do? How do you retain that employee? How do you accommodate that employee? So we still have a lot of work to be done there. But of course, there's still a lot of work to be done within our community. You and I talked a lot about mentorship.
Hmm.
You're in a startup. I've once again started another business, except honestly, I don't have the 100 plus hours a week in me like I used to. I just
Right.
don't. And it's hard for me to understand, how do I schedule my life around these health conditions that I have, because I can still do something. Unfortunately, society kind of puts us in one of two buckets: very productive and successful, or on disability.
Hmm.
We need more buckets. So tell me a little bit about some of your ideas around mentorship for the chronic illness community.
Yeah. That was one of the things when I was going through some of my worst, times, physically. I don't know. I'd argue, the mental strain was almost as bad as the physical strain,
Mm,
as far as that. And I really didn't have anyone to
mhm.
talk to. And obviously, therapy is a much more accepted means of mental of health of wellness now, which is great. But even in that regard, there's not a lot of therapists that handle. I'm sure there are, but not as widely available, that focus on chronic illness and how to navigate that. And so it was just, I felt lonely, and so I was thinking that, like, hey, it'd be great as part of the CCF and the foundation to really provide a mentorship, because I couldn't imagine you know, being diagnosed as a teenager, for example, or a
Yeah.
young adult, and navigating those complexities, right? Dating, starting
Mm,
out in high school or college. I mean, ruthless times where people don't have a lot of empathy,
no.
for anyone's differences, right? And so I think there's a great opportunity, and I'd love to one, just help navigate things that I've gone through to help people, give them a sounding board, and also just say that, hey, like, I have what you have. I'm here. I'm successful. I have everything I wanted, in my life, but there's going to be challenges along the way, and how to navigate those things. And I don't have all the answers by any means, but I think a network like that would be hugely valuable. And CCF does a great job with Camp Oasis, which, for those who
Hmm.
don't know, is a camp for for kids that are afflicted with the either Crohn's or UC, and it's a great environment. There's strength in numbers when it comes to people who are struggling with something you're struggling with. And again, not a fun topic of conversation to have now, but even you can imagine when you're younger, right? And so that sense of community is largely, such a huge help to the patients. And yeah, I think that should, probably advance after that in your career of having a mentorship, and every every business and whether you have a coach or a mentor that helps you from a career perspective, we all probably have some of those that we look back and say, hey, this person really helped guide me in my career and was influential in making me what I am today. I think that there's a great opportunity for that also for those who are living chronically with some sort of disease that someone else is like you, right? And so
Mhm.
how can they help maybe be a sounding board, or even just have someone you can catch up with on a monthly basis or whatever. I think there's a huge gap, and I know personally, one, I'd love to be a part of something like that, and also I find it huge, immensely valuable for my own mental state as well.
Y No, absolutely, 10,000%. It's funny you talk about, dating, and I was diagnosed much later in life, and so I've been diagnosed now for about 11 years, and I was already married, and
Right.
I've often said to a friend of mine, we've both said it because we both have Crohn's disease, that if our husbands die, we're not remarrying. I
Yeah.
don't want to go through this again. I don't want to explain to people what my life is like.
Sure.
I do not want to tell them what they have to do when I'm in a flare. I
Right.
just don't want to do it. So to think about being young and a teenager and wanting to do the things that normal teenagers do, like date, I can only imagine how difficult that is.
Sure.
It's hard enough on us as adults.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting that we timed this interview for today because we talked about mentorship programs during right after I think our first Take Steps meeting, which was a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And just recently, within the past week, I've had two mentors come into my life. The first through the SBA, the Small Business Administration. And it just so happens that this man has worked in healthcare his entire career and has a son who has dealt with things similar to us.
Yeah.
And one of the first questions he asked me, he said, "Well, are you taking care of yourself?" I said, "Yes, yes, yes, sure, sure. But I need to figure out how much of this business I can execute and take forward." And he said, "No, no. Are you taking care of yourself?
Yeah.
Because you have a lot going on. What if we dial back a little bit and really hone in on just one really great thing instead of building a much larger business that's going to take away your health?" And I thought, maybe this is the mentor I've needed. And then
Yeah.
the second one came to me. I am the chairperson of the Virginia State Rehabilitation Council. So we had a big conference a couple of weeks ago, and the CEO of the State Rehabilitation Councils was gracious enough to take time to speak with me. And he also said, "Brandy, are you taking care of yourself? I see a lot of work here. I don't see a whole lot of you time."
Yeah.
And I thought, well, yeah, you know what? This is the mentor we all need.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think so often we try to be the person we were pre whatever it is we're suffering from. And we don't take into account, we don't give ourselves grace and allow ourselves to give time to take care of ourselves and our disease. And to be fair, I think society doesn't really give a lot of people grace. It's all, particularly in the US, work, 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 achieve, 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 achieve. And if you take one step off of that treadmill,
Yeah.
good luck getting back on the treadmill. They don't really want you on there.
Yeah. Well said.
So
Yeah. Well said.
yeah, so it's interesting how these mentorship programs they don't really exist, but I have looked into a couple, and how much does every chronic illness person really need that?
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. So I think as we just had our executive committee meeting last night in prep for the Take Steps walk in Philadelphia, which is on May 9th. Um, I think one of the things we're going to try to do is kind of put some sort of mentorship program in process,
Mm,
for the committee at least, and maybe that starts with a one-off. I have some contacts that some friends of mine who have kids have Crohn's, and I always try to offer my services or just an ear to listen. And I know it's tough, right? I mean, no 12-year-old, 13-year-old is going to want to talk about that, and
no.
they, I'm an old guy to them, and they're like, I don't want to talk about anything, right?
Mhm.
So, there's probably, there's ways to probably do that and meet people in like-minded areas and ages to help kind of, bolster that, collaborative situation. But yeah, I think there's a great opportunity for that, and I try to make myself available, one off whenever I can to folks that I, either bring up, or I found out they have some sort of illness, and it's great to kind of just, be able to, level with them and understand what they're going through. And you made a great point, like, it's not often someone asks, like, hey, how are you doing? Like, I'm good. I'm like, no, 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 like, how are you doing, right?
Mhm.
So that's it's a unique person to have that, um, level of, I don't know if it's caring or whatever, but thoughtfulness probably is better said.
Yeah.
you know
Well, I think understanding as well. Nobody can really understand what we go through quite like us.
sure.
We get it. And I think mostly our families get it because they live with us every day.
Sure.
Even my husband, though, sometimes I could tell that he's a little confused. She seemed so well yesterday. What happened? Um, and he asks a lot of questions when we go to the doctor. And it's difficult to understand these things. How can this person who can look completely normal one day be completely debilitated the next day? It's hard to wrap your head around. Um, so I understand why people in general don't ask that often because they probably
Sure.
don't know your limitations. I don't know my limitations. I
Yeah.
do too much all the time, and it's only in hindsight that I think, well, maybe I shouldn't have done so much. I needed to take a break and rest. So yeah, but I think the more we get out there and talk, the more people understand how unique these diseases are and how difficult it is for the person living it to,
Sure.
put parameters around it. Maybe they can understand that maybe it's best just to ask, "Hey, how are you doing?
Yeah.
You must be going through a lot right now." Or, are you
Sure.
doing too much? Are you taking care of yourself? I think those are important questions to ask, even when you don't completely understand what
Yeah.
somebody's dealing with.
Yeah, at the large corporation level, I think, they're doing a better job around wellness, and that's a
Hmm.
generic term, certainly, but in smaller companies, I know it's tougher to build a program around that.
Yes.
Not always a thing that can be budgeted or resourced. But certainly, what I've gone through, has provided me with a lot of empathy, for my own team, that and people that I work with, to just make sure I'm checking in, right? Like, I
Hmm.
know there's a fine line between, HIPAA laws and all the other stuff, right? But, I definitely want to make sure that, um, I'm here, and I'm and able to support anything they need, whether it be, mental or physical, and anything they need in support of that. I try to make sure that I'm very open with them about, my struggles and what I go through, and, um, doesn't mean I practice what I preach sometimes, because sometimes I'll just push through and not give myself the space or the time, to kind of recoup when I have, a bad day or so. But, I try to at least make sure that, the folks that I work with understand, that they need to take care of themselves, and whatever that looks like. Um, you know, because we're all here as a corporation to build something and be successful. But, if everyone, is not taking care of themselves, and whatever that means for them, we're not going to be successful at all. So, I try to remind myself of that, and certainly it's easy to forget, and weeks go by, and you're trying to execute on forecasts and goals, and
Hmm.
you can easily forget about that. But I try to be mindful of it, because certainly I need to remind myself about for my own sake, um,
Right.
to take an assessment sometimes and say, hey, like, am I taking care of myself? Am I doing the right things?
Well, I think it's especially difficult depending on what you do. I've always joked that I accidentally went into the wrong career field to have Crohn's disease because I worked in consulting, which anybody who's worked in consulting knows you eat what you kill,
Yeah.
and it's pretty brutal. And on top of it, I was in programs that were all top secrets. So good luck working from home doing that.
Right. Right.
For those who don't understand top secret work, it's all done in something called a skiff. It's very locked away. You can't do it at home. So I really kind of messed up there. But I think for some of the mentorship programs can help younger people when you have this is kind of guide them towards careers that are more
Sure.
forgiving to having a chronic illness because they are out there. It's not all, you know, big finance and consulting. There's tons of careers that won't require you to work the round the clock hours to make partner or get out there, work, and get that next $700 million deal. You just have to understand that. Of course, as we get older, or if we are diagnosed older, that's far more difficult to
Sure.
navigate. And I've also encountered as I've gone through, especially after starting my business and, working with companies to help them to better integrate these wellness programs, there is a great attention to wellness programs. But for companies right now, they largely think in terms of chronic illnesses such as high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity, things like this.
Mm.
And those are important because you
Sure.
lose a lot of days at work when you're dealing with chronic illness that can be preventable. But I never see anybody really think about the stuff that can't be prevented, like Crohn's or UC. Neither one of us got this because we were,
Yeah.
eating terrible or, doing something unhealthy. Some things just happen and we can't control them. And it's harder to get companies to think about that in particular. What happens when your employee is suddenly diagnosed with lupus
Hmm.
and may need accommodations to deal with that illness? That's
Yeah.
that's a very different question. Whether you're a large company or a small, I think, and of course, small can be both easier and more difficult
Right.
because you're trying to get something going. You're working,
Sure.
working, working. So if you're in the middle of a big momentum, how do you say, oops, got a flare, need 2 days off?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
that's good. That's a great question, and I haven't figured that out yet because I haven't allowed myself to do that. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's it's a great point in that I've been lucky enough to for the most part have a flexible work from home type of environment. I mean, certainly I've traveled a ton and have been on cross country flights mostly in the bathroom, which those
Mhm. Yep.
aren't fun, but yeah, and that's a great point around you know, you listen, if you're a carpenter or working with your hands, it's going to be hard to navigate that probably a little more differently than if you're working behind a computer.
Mhm.
In my world, I'm on calls all the time, and right now I'm in a good spot where I can, I don't have to um, go off camera and take a call from the bathroom, which I've done hundreds of times, right?
Oh, yes.
So, that's hard to navigate. Should I probably not join that call? Yeah, probably, but I didn't allow myself that space to, um, give myself the time to recoup. And honestly, at that point, um, there wasn't a end state that I was confident that I could feel better at some point. And so I'm like, well, I'm just going to have to do this and I can't not work.
Yeah.
To your point, right? It's either it's a zero sum game for most of the folks where it's either you're full time employed or you're on disability. And there's no real gray area of how we support folks that are, trying to trying to be full time employees, but need some space to navigate their illnesses.
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult. I've done the same thing you have. I've lost count of the number of calls. I'm just off camera
Right.
and in the bathroom,
Yeah.
and thankfully nobody knows. Now, of course, everybody will question when I'm off camera what's
Right.
going on, but
Right. Yeah.
I
Right.
mean, you do what you have to. Because I've always said, what was I supposed to do when my only two options seem to be work constantly or disability, but disability requires you to go into poverty.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
have bills. I have a mortgage. I love to work. I don't want to not work. It's not just a simple, okay, I'm in a bad place. Let me go on disability while I get through things. We just don't have that option in the US, unfortunately, as much as I think we should. You have to go through a full process. There's usually lawyers involved, a judgment. And once you're on, you're on. It's not something you're just on and off with.
Right.
So, creating that space in between for people to say, you know what, I can still work, but let me take a little step back here while I deal with this illness. It's so important because we're
Yeah.
losing so many people from the workforce, so many.
Yeah. No, it's a great point, and certainly something we have not solved, in the U.S. and it's a challenge. I'm not going to say it's easy both from an employee or employer perspective.
No, yes,
Um, certainly there's challenges, and even a small company, right, where there's not there isn't a backup or a resource shifting ability where it's like, well, we would need to hire somebody new, and so there's not a you know there's a
there's no budget.
there's a headcount for this one role, right? And there's not
Yes,
and so yeah, so that's certainly a challenge. And I will say that I probably wouldn't be in the role that I am today if I wasn't in remission, which is a stressful position to think about. And I
yes,
probably don't too much because I don't want to think about what that looks like when I'm in a flare, trying to navigate, my day as it is today. But those things, and who knows, right? I'm in a good spot. I go every 8 weeks. I get my infusion, and I've taken calls many times during my infusions, right? And so,
yes,
um, so I have a challenge in kind of probably allowing myself some space, which I need to work on. But at the same time, I also have responsibilities that you I want to, I want to do, I want to, do the things I'm here to do, and I feel like an obligation to do that, and I want to do it. So yeah, all those things, certainly make it difficult to navigate, and I know it's not easy for an employer to kind of help you navigate that. Um,
no,
so it's a tough spot for everybody.
it truly is. But I think, showing that you can do it is so important so people can see it. I know you and I have both been in the same situation. There are people all over this country, just like us, who've done the same things, taken that phone call and turned off the camera, worked through a flare, put in the hours. And I think it's important for people to know we work hard, we have
Yeah,
capabilities that non-disabled people just often don't have. It's not that they never have them, but we have to learn how to be flexible and resilient in a way that's very difficult for
sure.
most people to learn. I
Yeah,
don't want to be this resilient, I don't want to be this flexible, but I have to be. And
sure.
I think it's important to share that with the world, that that's
Yeah.
who we are.
And the Crohn's Colitis Foundation is doing amazing things with
Mhm.
awareness, and I think when you look at the mentorship aspect of that opportunity is one, kind of bringing more awareness in as they get younger, to help navigate some of those things, so they have the skill set to maybe um, be able to navigate those challenges as they're older. Where I grew up, I didn't have I didn't have a lot of limitations that on my own physical ability. There wasn't a lot there. So to me, I still act as if I'm frustrated when I can't do something because of
Mhm.
a physical flare, and I probably push myself more so to just do it anyway. Um, and that may or may not be always the right answer, but I think the mentorship program can help younger folks kind of build a process to and understand what it looks like to create space and to give yourself the ability to recoup or get better. And again, that doesn't mean it's not going to be a challenge when they get into the workplace, but hopefully, with more awareness comes more,
Mhm.
empathy, and also understanding of, what that looks like for someone with Crohn's or colitis. And so yeah, I mean, I think that's the grassroots effort, and then obviously
Yes.
what you're doing, more so from a corporate perspective. We just need more folks like you to kind of help folks, navigate the challenges, and hopefully give employers the understanding of how to help do that as well, because I'm sure they're also lost in how to navigate that.
Of course. I mean, we all are.
Yeah,
We all are. It's such a difficult problem set. There's no easy answer. But, so thankful for, everybody who is talking about it. I love the Crohn's Colitis Foundation Let's Go There campaign. I think it's really getting the word out there and
yeah,
helping people to understand our diseases better and, what it's like to live with it.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Matt. This has been great. We'll
Yeah,
have to do this again. Um, Maybe we'll get one of our three dogs, on.
yeah,
Sometimes Sunny likes to join the podcast. The other two don't like to be on camera, but Sunny, she loves to be
yeah.
on camera.
We got lucky today because normally they'd be right there, but they're getting groomed today. So
Uh oh.
I kicked them out for the podcast.
Oh, they got a nice quiet,
They're getting this little
house.
spa day for the dogs. Yeah,
Yeah, I love to give them a little spa day, but I record at least once a week, so they can't get that many
no,
spa days.
that's a little excessive, but no, that's
A
great.
little
Well, no,
excessive.
it was great to see you again, Brandy, and I really appreciate you having me on. And yeah, if anyone's interested in learning more about Crohn's colitis, definitely check out the Crohn's colitis Foundation. We do a lot locally in each of the chapters. I'm in the Philly chapter. Obviously, you're in the kind of DC, Maryland area. But yeah, reach out if you have any questions, and happy to talk about
All right. Thank you so much for being on Living Chronic.
it. Thanks, Brandy. Have a great one.
That's a wrap for this episode of Living Chronic. I hope today's conversation gave you insight, inspiration, or at least a little reassurance that you're not alone on this journey. Living with a chronic illness or disability comes with its challenges, but it also comes with strength, resilience, and a community that understands. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. You could follow me on Instagram at Chronically Brandy Schantz, other socials at Brandy Schantz, or my website at brandyschantz.com for more discussions, advocacy updates, and everyday strategies for thriving with a chronic illness. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep pushing forward, keep advocating for yourself, and remember, you are more than your diagnosis. You are powerful, you are unstoppable. Thanks for listening to Living Chronic. See you next time.